Waking up in a strange, surreal dream, the protagonist realizes he's present in a limbo world between life and death called the Barrens, where he gets instructed by a spirit hiding inside a shell to confront an evil spirit in the real world who has been hunting the grounds of Juniors, a restaurant that belongs to the Fazbear Entertainment franchise. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator, and welcome to FNAF JR'S. If you have any game suggestions, make sure to DM me or tag me on Twitter, and for theory discussions, follow me on my subreddit. Keep in mind that this video will have spoilers as always, and with that said, let's begin. The protagonist feeling strange, as if he's not fully awake, yet feeling fine. He comes across a 2D bear-shaped entity known as paulbear, a passive spirit in a limbo in between life and death, which he calls the Barrens. The Barrens, as the name suggests, is empty, as if present in a void, with a brain hanging above and obscured images decorating the distant walls of this bubble in the void. Paulbear explains the protagonist can leave the Barrens anytime he wants, going back to the real world, but before he does so, he has been summoned here to help paulbear with an unfinished business in the real world. Paulbear explains how he's been trapped in the Barrens for as long as he can remember, hoping one day someone like the protagonist would awaken in the limbo and help him move on to the afterlife. Paul, in return, promises the protagonist he would help him with his investigation in the Juniors, seemingly with the protagonist being a paranormal investigator. After shaking on it and agreeing to help each other, paulbear instructs the protagonist to go to the nearby bed in order for him to be transported back to the real world. As the protagonist does so, he awakens in the Juniors, performing a thorough investigation on the place, observing the horrifying paranormal activities, which brings the night to an end, with the next day commencing being Tuesday. As the protagonist goes back to the Barrens to meet with paulbear, he explains how Juniors has been targeted by a malevolent spirit who possesses animatronics for a long time now, hence why the protagonist encountered so many paranormal events. The protagonist, being suspicious of paulbear, interrogates him if a spirit managed to go to the real world, why can't he do the same, pushing the protagonist to do this job for him. When paulbear unveils that he's scared, hence why he's been hiding in the bear suit for such a long time, paulbear continues that he's scared of the evil spirit hunting Juniors, a spirit who would cause serious damage even to a spirit such as paulbear. Paul explains how he is a spirit who has been hiding from her inside a bear suit in the Barrens, with the evil spirit not knowing about it. He explains how he cannot risk getting out of it, as it would expose him to her, hence why he has tasked the protagonist with his dangerous mission to get rid of this evil spirit. The protagonist subsequently goes back to the bed to reawaken in the Juniors, where he experiences more paranormal events with the evil spirit seemingly trying to harm him. As the protagonist manages to finish the shift in one piece, he stumbles upon a VHS tape known as the Freddy and Friends Backstage, Episode 1. The VHS tape shows Freddy carrying an arm to the room with obscured label which barely can be read as mangle, when the perspective changes to Freddy's concerned and terrified expression, observing what monstrosity Mangle has become. Of course, Mangle in FNAF is the result of Funtime Foxy sustaining severe damage by toddlers, getting repaired by the staff after each shift, creating such a monstrosity known as the Mangle. As Wednesday night commences, the protagonist finds himself back in the Barrens, talking to paulbear once more. He explains what he saw in the videotape, with paulbear speculating that the spirit is probably trying to build herself a new body, a mangled body, hence why Freddy was carrying a part of animatronics to the room, a part that was seemingly taken off from other functional animatronics. As a result, the protagonist goes back to the bed and reawakens in the Juniors. After a stressful shift dealing with an angry spirit, the protagonist comes across another VHS tape labeled as Episode 2. The tape shows a concerned Freddy putting pieces of papers together, creating a new mangled animatronic, as if depicting the new animatronic the spirit is building for herself, with Bunny being next to Freddy, observing this atrocity. Freddy also plays with a cutout board with a drawing of an angered cartoonish spirit, which represents the evil spirit which has been forcing the other animatronics to build her a new body. After a jump cut, Bunny is seen carrying an animatronic piece to the mangle room, when the scene is cut prematurely with Bunny holding a portrait of himself embracing Freddy, portraying how close they are. Thursday night, night 4 begins, with the protagonist yet again finding himself back in the limbo. Instead of finding paulbear in his usual place, the protagonist finds a freestanding long ladder reaching the ceiling of this bubble in the void. Reaching the top of a rock-like object, the protagonist finds paulbear sitting quietly, observing the brain and the dark scenery, feeling like he's been beaten with him running out of time. The protagonist, starting to feel some sort of friendship with him, promises him not to worry, as despite the spirit having a new buddy, which seems to be dwelling in the basement of Junior's, he's willing to face her and take her down, as he wouldn't let the spirit take paulbear. As he reawakens back in Junior's, the protagonist manages to finish his investigation when he comes across another VHS tape being directed towards him, as it's labeled, "I know you are with him." The tape shows how Chica is sleeping, dreaming of pizza, when her dreams are interrupted by the evil spirit, scaring her into working at night, bringing the spirit new animatronic parts to complete the mangled body, parts that are ripped away from other animatronics. As Friday night commences, the protagonist is back to the limbo, finding paulbear in his usual space. As they plan to take the spirit by surprise and bring an end to her tyranny and reign of terror, paulbear explains that he found the secret entryway to the basement long time ago, a passage which the evil spirit possibly knows about, warning the protagonist to be careful. After reawakening in the Junior's and finishing his investigation, the protagonist finds another VHS tape which shows the mangle almost being complete, with Chica, Freddy, and Bunny being present as her minions in submission, offering more animatronic parts. The protagonist, being back in the limbo again, talks to Paul, who explains he opened the passageway to the center of the basement for the protagonist to enter. He continues that the evil spirit made the basement into a game which the protagonist plans to play along so they could trap the spirit. Paul continues explaining if they succeed, the evil spirit will be trapped in the limbo alongside other corrupt spirits who will live here for eternity, rotting and becoming a shadow of what they used to be. This would also mean Paul would be free to go to afterlife, which makes this meeting their last, when they bid each other farewell. As the protagonist goes through the door right into the basement, he comes across a terrifying place which has been seemingly decorated with paranormal items, terrifying the protagonist. Nonetheless, the protagonist stands his ground and plays along, doing what is required to outmaneuver the evil spirit and corrupted animatronics, even observing the horrendous and terrifying look of the new mangle. Suddenly, the perspective changes to the security monitor, where the spirit has left the protagonist intimidating notes telling him to back off, portraying how many parts are transported to the mangle, completing the body for the spirit to possess. Being able to use the cameras this time, the protagonist notices what a Goliath monstrosity the mangle has become, who could easily swallow him whole if he's not careful. The spirit changing the environment to make it more terrifying for the protagonist to break down his spirit. She becomes more aggressive, targeting the protagonist with all of her might. Despite all of her efforts, the protagonist manages to overcome her tricks and traps, with the night coming to an end when the time turns to 6 a.m. As the spirit is loose, it goes to the Barrens, when she realizes that paulbear is hiding in one of the costumes. As she explains to him that she has finally found him, now able to destroy him in an agonizing manner, explaining how Paul had unsuccessfully indoctrinated so many before, the protagonist comes from behind, surprising the spirit and trapping her in the limbo forever, letting Paul finally go free. After this entire conundrum, Junior's reopens after 5 years, heavily rebranding itself in order to attract new customers and restore its business reputation. This time, they reinvest in the company and spend a fortune for new animatronics to safely function, which brings the story to the very beginning, where Jeremy Fitzgerald is being instructed how to operate the systems and start work at the new Freddy Fazbear's restaurant in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Despite the game acting as a prequel, it is still taking place after William Afton murdered the children and many of the spirits possessing the animatronics. It's very likely the evil spirit that has been hunting juniors was one of the children who became very vengeful, unable to move on to the afterlife, all because of the horrors that she had to experience. But Paul, despite being one of the children that was murdered in cold blood, decided to move on, not harm anyone else undeserving, and live peacefully in the afterlife. And that's about it for this video, folks. If you enjoyed it, make sure to stay tuned by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your host Star, as always. Until the next video, have a fantastic day.